And the ongoing investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie from the Catalina foothills, the public has been looking in the wrong direction. The forensic profile extracted from an abandoned glove does not match the primary suspect, Dominic Aaron Lee Evans. How does a masked intruder spend 41 minutes inside an occupied residence without making a single fatal error? And why did a figure practice walking backward past a surveillance lens 9 days before the breach? The single suspect theory is mathematically impossible. If you want every development in this case as it happens, subscribe now, because this story is still moving. At exactly 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, the doorbell camera guarding the property went entirely dark. 39 minutes later, at 2:28, the homeowner's cardiac pacemaker permanently lost its digital connection. That timeline establishes an undisputed, terrifying fact. Intruders remained inside the residence for 41 consecutive minutes. To understand the gravity of that window, you must understand the psychology of illegal entry. A seasoned burglar operates within strict 5-minute parameters. 10 minutes indicates severe disorganization. 20 minutes is an unacceptable tactical risk. Spending 41 minutes inside a stranger's house under the cover of darkness means the individuals involved were not rushing. They were comfortable. They understood the floor plan, and they possessed absolute certainty that law enforcement was not en route. During that expansive window, an 84-year-old woman, described by authorities as sharp and fully aware, had to be located, physically managed, navigated through the darkened hallways, and loaded into a waiting transport. A single attacker attempting this maneuver faces compounding risks with every passing second. The physiological stress alone makes the operation nearly suicidal. But when the labor is divided, one individual secures the perimeter, while the other manages the occupant. Former FBI negotiation experts have confirmed that managing an elderly hostage while coordinating an extraction requires a sustained cognitive load that a lone operator simply cannot maintain. The Sheriff's Department has conspicuously refused to rule out an accomplice. But the physical environment itself already confirms it. Back at the exterior of the property, the forensic picture sharpens. Aerial footage revealed that the rear floodlights illuminating the perimeter had been systematically destroyed. Simultaneously, the primary camera facing the street was blinded. This is a coordinated two-point entry. It requires simultaneous execution, pre-planned positioning, and absolute temporal precision. Two individuals who mapped their sight lines before they ever stepped onto the pavement. But the surveillance campaign leading up to that night is where the true behavioral signature emerges. On January 23rd, a figure was recorded testing residential cameras roughly 6.5 miles away. This individual walked backward past the lens. You need to understand why that specific physical orientation matters. Standard consumer security networks utilize passive infrared sensors. The technology remains dormant until ambient body heat triggers a wake protocol. The sensor alerts the processor, the lens attempts to focus, and the network handshake begins. That mechanical sequence requires 1 to 2 seconds. If you approach walking forward, that momentary lag still captures your facial geometry. But by reversing his approach, this individual weaponized the camera's own processing delay. By the time the lens began recording, his face was entirely shielded. He physically defeated the technology using nothing but velocity and positioning. That is not the behavior of an opportunist. That is a tactical rehearsal. When a neighborhood dog began barking, the figure retreated, yet he maintained his backward orientation. He actively suppressed the involuntary human reflex to turn toward a sudden threat. He accepted the risk of stumbling rather than surrendering a single frame of his face. 9 days later, someone wearing the exact same distinctive Ozark Trail backpack arrived at Nancy Guthrie's door. But the testing phase was over. He walked forward, tapped the lens twice, and proceeded. The January 23rd rehearsal had confirmed he was invisible. The profile pointed to chaos. Until investigators realized the incompetence wasn't a mistake, it was a disguise. Do you believe the untreated ring camera footage points to a highly disciplined operative, or does the cheap tactical gear prove this was simply a chaotic, disorganized break-in? If the next forensic filing changes what we covered today, you will want to be here for it. Step back from the physical location for a moment. Consider the individual who stepped onto that porch. The intelligence required to execute this operation, knowledge of the specific medication schedules, the exact pacemaker transmission timing, the disabled gate mechanisms, cannot be gleaned from sitting in a parked vehicle. That intelligence flows from an architect, someone who mapped the vulnerabilities from the inside, while a separate operative provided the physical capability to enter the structure at 1:47 in the morning. The evidence continues to circle Dominic Aaron Lee Evans. At 48 years old, the Tucson area educator and longtime musician aligns with the federal behavioral and physical descriptions with unnerving precision. The FBI documented a male suspect, roughly 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches, of average build, wearing dark clothing, a ski mask, and an Ozark Trail backpack. Crucially, profilers noted distinct facial hair visible beneath the mask and a specific marking on the right wrist. Photographic records of Dominic Aaron Lee Evans confirm the required height and build. They document the exact facial hair pattern. And performance footage from his musical career displays a wrist marking consistent with the profiler's exact notes. Then there is his documented history within the Pima County Judicial Database. The entries record prior felony charges involving burglary, robbery, and theft. In a legal context, burglary denotes unlawful entry with intent. Robbery denotes the extraction of property through intimidation or force. Entry, confrontation, extraction. That is the precise operational skill set required on the night of February 1st. Yet, neither DNA profile recovered from the crime scene generated a match in SOTUS, the national database of 19 million offender profiles. For an ordinary citizen, an unknown result simply means they've never been processed. But for an individual with established felony entries, a database absence requires an explanation. Depending on when the specific convictions occurred in relation to Arizona's evolving mandatory collection statutes, or if the cases were resolved through specific plea mechanisms, an individual can possess a severe criminal history while remaining a forensic ghost. But there was a detail sitting on the kitchen counter that completely recontextualized the timeline. Nancy Guthrie's essential daily medications were left untouched. 41 minutes to extract an 84-year-old hostage, and the intruders abandoned the exact pharmaceuticals required to manage a potentially fatal outcome. You do not leave the medication behind if you require the hostage to survive. The case seemed to be collapsing into unrelated fragments, until investigators examined the specific black nitrile gloves worn by the suspect on the porch. The exact same gloves used every working day by an AP biology teacher. 4 miles away from the perimeter, a different narrative was unfolding. Tomaso Chioni has been married to Annie Guthrie since 2006. 2 decades of Friday night dinners, 2 decades of walking past those specific cameras, through that specific gate, and down that specific hallway. Tomaso teaches advanced placement biology. He is the bass player in the same band as Dominic Aaron Lee Evans. And he is the last confirmed individual to have seen Nancy Guthrie alive, having walked her to the door at approximately 9:50 that evening. The gear worn by the suspect requires intense scrutiny. An AP biology instructor understands the precise mechanics of PCR amplification and gel electrophoresis. He understands exactly how biological material transfers between surfaces. Black nitrile gloves are standard issue in every secondary school laboratory. But a science professional also understands their limitations. Nitrile is rated for chemical resistance, not for total forensic sealing. During intense physical exertion, microscopic tears form. Perspiration compromises the barrier. An educated operative knows those gloves must be discarded miles from the primary scene. A glove containing male DNA was subsequently recovered 2 miles away. No match in the national database. Tomaso Chioni possesses no criminal record. If that material belonged to him, the laboratory return would look exactly as it does right now. Unknown. Consider the $20 Ozark Trail backpack in the incorrectly positioned holster. Tactical analysts have noted the equipment was universally cheap and incorrectly deployed. Defenders argue a highly educated teacher would never commit such elementary tactical errors. But in a forensic countermeasures context, the worst possible equipment is the strongest possible defense. If you deploy advanced night vision and suppressed weaponry, profilers immediately hunt a disciplined, highly educated professional. But if you deliberately wear clearance aisle reflective gear and position a holster backwards, you generate a profile of a disorganized, impulsive amateur. You engineer a costume. 3 miles south on the quiet residential expanse of Camino Real, a local Ring camera captured a critical transit. The road bypasses every major intersection leading out of the Catalina foothills. At 2:36 in the morning, a vehicle assessed as a Kia Soul passed the lens. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker disconnected at 2:28. The driving route requires exactly 6 minutes. That leaves a 2-minute operational margin. Exactly the time required to pause at the intersection, remove a mask, check the mirrors, and accelerate. The most alarming aspect of this footage, the camera was located 2.5 miles from the residence. Law enforcement had established a strict 2-mile canvassing radius. The homeowners voluntarily submitted the footage because investigators never knocked on their door. But the filing deadline changes everything we just covered. Because if the formal motions regarding the durable power of attorney are not addressed, the financial timeline remains legally invisible. 8 months before the disappearance, documents were reportedly drafted granting Annie Guthrie control over Tomaso's financial affairs. Federal agents subsequently returned to their residence on 5 separate occasions. They removed items in brown paper evidence bags. A vehicle was impounded. A septic tank was examined. The family was publicly cleared by the local sheriff. Yet federal behavior suggests a completely different procedural reality. And then there is the silence. While Savannah Guthrie and the extended family issued public pleas and offered a massive financial reward, Tomaso Chioni remained entirely absent from the media landscape for weeks. Silence is often a prudent legal strategy. but it creates a glaring behavioral contrast against a family begging for a resolution. When a ransom demand finally surfaced, the methodology exposed the architect. The demand requested $6 million in Bitcoin. A random operative demands an astronomical, rounded figure. But $6 million represents a highly specific, calculated assessment of liquid assets versus total net worth. The digital wallet created for the transaction has remained entirely dormant. When federal agents deposited a tracking fraction, no movement occurred. The ransom was never a genuine mechanism for wealth transfer. It was a strategic diversion designed to point investigators toward a financial motive, while the true objective remained obscured. The communications reportedly used the phrase main individual, a hierarchical linguistic marker confirming that multiple people were operating within a structured chain of command. Tad DeBiosi, a federal prosecutor specializing in cases lacking physical remains, has identified a critical procedural failure: the refusal to execute a comprehensive grid search across the surrounding desert washes leaves the prosecution vulnerable. Without verifying the absence of a victim, defense teams can easily argue the individual simply wandered away. The United Kingdom Navy, equipped with thermal imaging drones and canine units, offered full deployment capabilities. The local sheriff formally declined their assistance. 2 DNA profiles require 2 distinct genetic family trees. A single microscopic rootless hair currently undergoing advanced processing holds the potential to collapse the entire framework. In a 2-person conspiracy, loyalty is a mathematical liability. A $1 million reward sits waiting for the first individual to break rank, while the second absorbs the full weight of the federal justice system. 19 years of shared musical history was never designed to withstand the pressure of a federal indictment. If this investigation matters to you, the next legal development is one you will not want to miss. Whether the $6 million Bitcoin strategy mirrors the digital diversion tactics used in other unsolved Catalina foothills disappearances is a pattern the public record has not yet fully exposed.